Today, we will be hearing from Yogesh Kumar, Executive Director of Samartan based in India, and Albert Van Seal, Manager of Learning and Knowledge Development at the IBP based in South Africa. Today, Kumar and Van Seal will draw lessons from the recently updated IBP case study, Samartan's campaign to improve access to the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme in India. The materials for the session are available to you right now under the Materials tab, and will also be available to you after the session through the same link that you used to register and join the webinar. Just a few words on the logistics. The call will last approximately 1 hour. We will start with the presentations, which will last approximately 20 minutes, and the remaining time will be for Q&A. For those not familiar with this webinar software, or those who've recently joined, all the participants are on mute, so we don't have too much background noise. You all will follow along on your screen the PowerPoint presentations. And after we listen to both presentations, you can either raise your hand by clicking the hand icon next to your name, or submit a written question via the question box. That's the chat box at the bottom right of your screen. If you submit a written question, I'll read it out on your behalf during the Q&A period, noting your name. If you raise your hand when we get to you during the Q&A period, I'll unmute you so you can ask your question to the participants. If your question is directly addressing Yogesh or Albert, just mention that. If it's to either of them, also mention that. We will be recording this webinar, and this will be posted on the IVP website. Again, many thanks to Albert and Yogesh and to all of you for joining us today. And without further delay, it is my pleasure to pass on the microphone to my colleague, Albert.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on your hemisphere. You'll see that the title of my presentation is the What, Why, and How of Strategy Adjustment. Then you see my name, and right underneath my name you'll see my Twitter handle. It's @AlbertIBP. I am as vain about my number of followers on Twitter as everybody else. So do me the favor of following me there. I've got I think I'm sitting on about 130. It'd be great to get to 150 sometime soon. All right, onto more important topics. The orientation of civil society, what we try and do, the reason why we're involved in budgets and in governance more generally, is because we want to change things. None of us are wizards, so we sometimes don't know how to bring that change about. So our strategies are really very important for that reason. So we need to think hard about what we try and achieve, and more importantly, in today's topic, when things don't work out the way that we planned or the way we thought they would, we need to create space for ourselves to adjust our strategies. So a couple of words just on what we're talking about. I was for all my sins, I was trained as a philosopher, and you will know that philosophers are better at asking questions and defining terms than they are at giving answers. So let me define my terms. I think the first thing here is to be clear that that what we are talking about today is strategy and not planning. And the distinction that I'm drawing there is that planning is about all sorts of things. It's about staffing. It's about making sure you got enough desks in your office. Whereas strategy is a plan for bringing change. And as I've indicated there, I'm sorry, my computer's doing funny stuff. So as I indicated on the slide, advocacy in particular is about socio-political change. It is when we try and bring about change in spaces that are politically and economically unequal, and where some people have an interest in keeping things the same and others have an interest in changing them. So what we're going to talk about today is specifically our plans for bringing about change in the socio-political context. As I said earlier, the reason why strategy adjustment is important is because our strategies are guesses about things that we don't know the answer to. So we are experienced and we do research, so we've got some information informing our plans. We've got some reasons why we follow the strategy that we're going to follow, but none of us are 100% certain that things are going to work out the way that we thought. I think I finally clicked the right button on that screen. It kept on popping up, so it should go away now. So if we're not sure, if we're not 100% certain that things are going to work out well for us, then we should consider the possibility that our best laid plans may fail. And obviously, if our plans fail, or it looks like our plans are going to fail, we need to adjust them. So obviously, strategy adjustment is important. The next thing which we will see in the Samarkand case study in particular is that things change. The context changes. The governments change. Economic environments change. Political players change. So the things that work at one point in time may not work in the future. So again, you'll see in the Samarkand case study that there were initial set of impacts. Things went really well in the beginning. Then government learned how to work the Narega program. So they learned how to derive benefit from it themselves. As a result, Samarkand had to adjust the strategy that worked in the beginning, but then government started resisting. All right, so strategy adjustment is important because none of us have a 2020 vision of the future, and things change, our plans change. The next thing question that I'd like to talk about is how will we know that we need to adjust? How will we know that our plans need to change? So the first thing that is important here is that we should be clear not just about what activities we're going to perform, but what our strategy is. So we need to be explicit about why it is we follow the strategies that we follow, and what our assumptions are behind it. If we have a map of where it is that we plan to go, then it'll be very easy to monitor whether we're actually arriving in a place or not. If we don't have such a map, it's much harder, obviously. The next thing that's important is some way of knowing whether we're on track or not. So how will we know that a strategy is not working and in need of adjustment? So what information, which events will tell us that there's something going on here that we need to consider? So again, you'll see in the Samarkand case, one of the things that told them that things were not going the way that they should were their village level community workers. So people came back to them and said, look, officials are resisting, officials are harassing us. That was information that Samarkand could use to say, maybe our plan isn't working out the way that we thought it would. The next thing that is important, it may appear pretty simple, but again, in the Samarkand case, you'll see that it's very important. Is the question, when and where will you decide that your strategy isn't working? So, is there a space where you can use this information that is available to you to reflect with staff, with others? Is there a space? Is there an annual meeting? Is there a weekly meeting? Is there a quarterly meeting? The IBPs for our country strategies running quarterly meetings where we reflect on whether our plans are going the way that they're supposed to. So obviously all the information in the world won't do us much good if we don't create the space to try and understand what that information is telling us about our strategies. I would even go so far as to say that if we've got space to do this sort of reflection, that one needs less information rather than more. So which assumptions to monitor? Which parts of our strategies do we want to monitor? The first thing here that is really important is that it's not everything. If we try and monitor everything, we get monitoring and evaluation frameworks that make our heads spin and that everybody hates and we can't do anything with. So we propose a slightly different tool on, as I say there, page 32 of the Super Duper Impact Planning Guide. Sorry about the name, it was my fault. You'll see a link to it on the slide. On our website, you can also just do a search and you'll find it fairly easily. So what that tool does is to help one identify a number of potentially important assumptions that one makes in one strategy, and then you rank those assumptions by how important they are and how certain you are of them. So how important is this assumption to the success of your strategy, and how certain are you of this assumption? The assumptions that we want to monitor are the ones that are both that are important, firstly, and uncertain. So the most important ones to monitor are the ones that are important and uncertain. I give two kinds of examples there. So the first one is important and certain, second one important and uncertain. Now the reason why the important and certain ones are important is because these are our blind spots. These are the things that we think we know, but maybe we're not right. Okay. So, for example, in almost all of the IBP's country strategies, we assume that officials will, at least in principle, be prepared to engage with civil society organizations, right? And it's really important, right? Because if it's a complete stonewall, it's really hard to see how we might influence. But at the same time, it's not a given, right? So these sorts of assumptions are really important to watch, mostly because we tend not to. We tend to take them for granted. The second category, which are in a way almost safer, is what we refer to here as priority wildcards. These are things that are important and uncertain. So these are the things that are really important to our work, but we don't know how they will play out. So the first assumption that we make in almost all of our strategies is that the pro-accountability actors, the civil society coalition, will be strong enough to force change. Well, that's something that is fairly easy to watch because we know it's important, but it's uncertain. So we know that that's a weak spot. So in a way, we almost need to watch out slightly more carefully for these critical blind spots, because the tendency is not to watch them. So to give you two specific examples, sorry, Rasia, actually, I need to stop there. So we're going to listen to Yogesh next, and then I'll come back to my last two slides.
Thank you very much, Albert. Now we're going to go to listen to Yogesh, and then we'll complete the presentations with Albert.
Thank you, Rasia, and greetings to all who are in this webinar. It's a great pleasure to share the experience of Samarthan with all of you. My presentation would be primarily on the grassroots experiences of Samarthan on adaptation of strategies in a large program called NREGS, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. We decided to work in this program because of certain strategic objectives. We realized that the program, or the guarantee, the constitutional guarantee of 100 days of employment to the poor, whosoever is willing to do earth work, is a great opportunity for the poor to change their life, the poverty situation. They are supposed to earn about $2 a day if they do manual work. So one of the assumptions was that if this program succeeds, people get 100 days of employment, their abject poverty can be reduced and they can think of moving out of that. And in order to do that, we believe that not only the supply side will work, the demand side has to also work. And therefore, social audit, which is also one of the mechanisms provided in the constitutional provision, which has to happen on a 6 months basis, people should do that. As a people-centered accountability mechanism, promoting that those who are the worker should demand accountability from the implementing organizations. What we could do in these last 2 years in terms of our gains, one is that we could audit, people could audit, those who were the worker could audit about 924 million rupees of work under this program. They could discuss how the money has been spent in their villages. There were certain actions taken. There were areas spending for a very long time in one of the districts called Panna. 1 million rupees were distributed. $1 is about 60 rupees, so you can calculate how much would be in terms of the US dollars. There are a number of other examples where money was released to the poor wage earners whose money was withheld for a very long time, or they were paid lesser money than the amount of work they have done. The other is that the government of Madhya Pradesh recognized the importance of social audit, and they have involved the civil society organizations, including Samathan, to play a very important role in designing the social audit manual, the procedures and guidelines for them. They have also introduced a fund management system recently, which is electronic. This is e-based, synchronizing all the data which is coming from the lower level to the state level. The complete system is now transparent, online, and anybody can input information on that. I'll talk about that. Now, what were the challenges when we started doing the social audit in selective villages? Because we decided that first we should test the theory in a couple of villages. So we took 3 villages in 2 different socio-economic political conditions in 2 different geographical locations. But the experience was the same. We realized there are a number of challenges. One was that generally in India and many other developing countries, there is a nexus of the local elites who take over all control over the resources and programs, and therefore they are against any kind of accountability. They don't want workers to ask any questions about the money spent in their village. So that was a bigger challenge. And there's a cultural constraint also, that the poor who are dependent on the rich or the local elite, those who are politically also powerful, to ask any question. So they were weak in terms of demanding accountability. The third was that administrative machinery was also in nexus with the local elite. So they were not really interested in promoting social audit. So it was very difficult to get their support. Sometimes, as Albert said, they were quite against the whole process of social audit. Unless we have information and documents, social audit cannot be done. How many days of wages should be paid to a particular worker, and how many days of wages have been shown on the muster rolls and in their account becomes extremely important. And these documents were not provided, they were manual and were with the panchayat or the implementing agency who were not able to have. So what we did in order to change our strategies or adapt our strategies, we thought that initially we should take less technical issues. There were higher order corruptions in a particular road. There was a corruption of more than 200,000 rupees. We said, okay, we'll take it later, but let us talk about the 15 days of wages that has not been given to a poor woman who has worked so hard in this program. So we negotiated and figured out what would be useful to promote this culture of accountability. We also developed a small social watch group at the district level, and these are the people who were from the civil society organizations, lawyers, retired bureaucrats who had a credential at the district level and had also influence to negotiate and talk to the district administration and the local elites. So that social watch group was also very important for us. We also negotiated solutions in favor of workers, in the sense that after the social audit was done and we realized that so many workers were paid, should have been paid say 15 days of wages, they are paid only 5 days, and then the implementation agency agreed that we will pay another 10 days of wages, so we agreed. So there were small solutions which happened at that level instead of taking it to a higher level. That gave a lot of satisfaction to people that something can come out of that. We also realized that in order to enhance the voice of the workers, they have to be organized. So trade unions of the workers were organized, their leadership abilities were also developed so that they can negotiate and they can speak up in these public meetings of social audit. Now, the larger challenge for us was to scale it up, because ultimately government would not be happy by seeing 3 or 4 examples in these 2 districts. They were interested for a very large scale implementation. And without the government support, it was risky. This was one of the challenges. So we decided to use the existing calendar when social audits needs to be done, so that there's a buy-in of the government. There was a limited information available to give teeth to the social audit process. So we decided that we'll find some way to deal with the access to information issue. In order to reach to so many villages, we wanted resources, and we were thinking of some model which is cost effective that we can sell to the government, and that is also sustainable. And fourth challenge was that how certain actions can be taken on the social audit decisions, because if that would not happen, people will become disinterested in any kind of social audit. So these were the larger challenges in front of us. And adaptive strategies were that we decided to go to 1,000 villages with the help of the civil society organizations where they had a strong presence in different regions. We identified 2 educated youth from the same village. Being part of the village assembly, they had the legitimate right to ask questions in social audit. So we did that. Fortunately, in this program, all data related to every village and household has been uploaded in the government system, and we could download information for each village, for each household who had worked, and given the printouts to these local youth after training them. So this was a very powerful tool in their hand which they could validate, and they found that number of people who were already dead were shown as people worked on the site, or some people who were in jail were given wages, or there were certain bills which were not existent but actually shown as completed. So that gave the power of the people to look at the information in use. This report of 1,000 villages was prepared in a formal document and shared with the senior officials, who took cognizance of the report and asked questions on it, and also registered certain complaints against certain officers. So that was extremely, I would say, satisfying for us. What triggered adaptation? Basically, we were sure that it's a very volatile kind of program in which we are. Social audit is not acceptable. Therefore, we have to have a constant feedback from my team. So regular monthly meetings, quarterly meetings, and annual reflections are extremely important. And not of only those people who are sitting in our office, but those who are actually on the ground, because they have the real information. So that really helped us to adjust strategies on fortnightly basis, monthly basis, because our strategic objective was more important than anything else. The regular feedback we got from the government officials when we were submitting the social audit reports also helped us to re-strategize ourselves, because that feedback was extremely important to change gears and change the style of functioning. There were incidences when our field staff was threatened. They were threatened to life. They were garrowed in a number of villages and told to them that you get out of these villages, otherwise you will be killed. And these were also the incidences we had to think about. And there were very motivated village youth who said, no, we would like to die. And we have to tell them, no, our battle is much bigger than your cost of life. So we'll have to be very careful. Let's not lose it. So those were, I think, some of the adaptations that happened. Now the government of Madhya Pradesh has set up a society. So new agenda for us is basically to strengthen the society, which has got independent resources to do social audit, and they have asked their own team they are setting up for social audit. So we have a new role to perform, that how to monitor the social audits done by the government-led teams and the social auditors they have identified at the village level. We have provided the design, but now how does it roll out? We will have to see that. This new electronic management information system that has been introduced has many glitches. In number of villages it is not functioning well. So we'll have to provide constant feedback so that it becomes a robust system that would work in the long run. And the third is we will continue to provide guidance that how the norms and procedures of social audit are accepted, used across the state in a meaningful manner. So these are some of the experience of advocacy we have. You can see one or two pictures of the local people working on a road and the women participating in a social audit meeting. I wish I had more pictures, and you can visit the website of Samarthan, samarthan.org. Thank you for listening. I look forward to your questions and reactions. Thank you, Rashia, for giving me that.
Thank you so much, Yogesh. We're going to go back to Albert to complete this presentation and final conclusions.
Great. Thanks, Rashia. Thanks very much, Yogesh. I thought just to make the bridge between what I said earlier and Yogesh's presentation, I'd give you two examples of these strategic guesses that Samartan adjusted. So these kind of hypotheses about how things might work out that Samartan's strategy effectively tested and found that they were in need of adjustment. So one might say that one of the key strategic assumptions that Samartan made at the beginning of the work on the employment guarantee scheme was that villages could influence government through social audits. This is what we earlier suggested might be called a priority wildcard. It is priority because it's something that's really important, and it's a wild card because it's something that we're not sure of, right? So this was clearly something that Samartan was going to try and bring about, but didn't know beforehand, and knew that they didn't know beforehand if this would work out. They soon discovered that this was not the case, and that there was a need to balance village power by bringing in urban elites. So bringing the social watch group that Yogesh spoke about. The second kind of assumption that we might make, and I don't think Yogesh spoke about this, but what happened during the project was that initially workers, a number of workers came onto the scheme, started participating in NREGA. Later on, it transpired that the government had been, through its actions, been pushing workers off the scheme. So one of the critical blind spots might have been in doing advocacy around this issue that the main challenge is to get workers into NREGA, right? So with many government programs where people are excluded, we assume that our work should target getting people in. And this is not something, this is not something that one would automatically question, but the discovery that Samartan made was that it was also a challenge to keep workers on NREGA. So that the challenge wasn't just getting people on, but it was also safeguarding their participation in the program once it had taken place. So in conclusion. No, my computer won't. Here we go. All right. So what we've been saying is that that some of the processes that we might follow to facilitate strategic adaptation is to identify key assumptions. And those assumptions, as I said earlier, were ones that are important, and they might be ones that we're sure of or not sure of. And the ones that we are sure of are possibly the most dangerous ones, because we tend not to monitor them, which is the second step. So which is to monitor what happens, so to make sure that we have good information about those assumptions, so that we get some information back about whether our strategy is working out. As I'll explain just now, that information can take many different forms. It doesn't have to be a complicated M&E system. The third thing that we emphasized was that if you've identified key assumptions, if you've ensured that you can get some information about how those assumptions are working out in practice, it's really important to keep and protect the space to reflect on the implications of that information and how one might adjust. So just to be a little bit thought-provoking and maybe a bit deliberate, I think I'd argue that strategy adjustment is not monitoring and evaluation. The risk of that is often run with monitoring evaluation is that it's very complex. It's very complicated. It demands a lot of work to put information through an M&E system. What we've been talking about here is a process that is in many ways simpler, but more demanding, because it engages with some tough political realities. So maybe the conclusion that I'd end with is that don't overplan and don't overmonitor. Great, thanks. Back to you, Russia.
Thank you very much, Albert and Yogesh. We really appreciate the focused presentations, and we will now open the floor for questions. I see there's a couple of hands up. by clicking to the hand next to your name, I will know that you want to ask a question, and I'll let you, I'll unmute you so you can ask your question. We'll start with Marilyn Rubin. Go ahead, Marilyn. We can hear you. Marilyn, we can hear you. Okay. Maria Cavatore, can you please go ahead with your question?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, my question is around, is for actually both. And I was wondering, the people, the government representative, which at the beginning of your advocacy strategy were actually reluctant to be challenged around their accountability, how did you make them change their mind to get them involved in the social audit process?
Go ahead, Yogesh.
Yes, thanks. It's a very important question. One is that there are initial apprehensions, and when we started engaging the government officials in the process of social audit, when they came together and heard the concerns of the villagers, we facilitated in such a manner that there is a dialogue between the government officials and the people. Then there was a comfort to them, and they finally realized that this negotiation, this conversation was quite helpful for them to understand the issues. So that is one. The second is at the local level, involving the government officials is far more difficult than involving the senior level officials, because they have a commitment for the constitutional provision of social audit, and therefore they see a value. So if the orders go from the top, it becomes far more easier for the district officials to accept. So, and it is in order to convince the senior government officials, we'll have to give concrete examples and concrete data, evidences that this is how it has worked and these are the issues. So that really worked a lot. And so at both the ends, this was being done. So
Albert,
using the,
okay, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. So using the constitutional provisions, the provisions of the act or the policy, really help government officials to commit on that. Sorry, please go ahead. Albert.
Thank you.
Yeah, there are a couple of there are a couple of other things that Samartha did that Yogesh can tell you more about. But I know, for example, from the background case study for this workshop, that Samartha also had a sort of a dual track strategy, in the sense that Samartha also helps government with a lot of stuff. It builds capacity of government with a whole lot of things, and that obviously builds trust, and it builds some kind of quid pro quo. So it seems as if in the Samarthan strategy there's a balance between what might be more confrontational and what is more cooperative.
Right. Thanks, Albert. That is true.
We have another question from the floor from Janet Lingen. Her question is, how do you deal with coordination and consensus when adjusting your strategy? Sometimes it takes time to get partners on the same page. Did they have this issue?
Right. Yeah, it's a tricky balance, how to achieve coordination and consensus. The first level of difficulty in achieving consensus is at the time of the social audit itself, whereas there are diverse interests of the workers. Some have a different set of problems. Some are fighting for better wages, others are fighting for better, I would say, benefits in the program, that they get well or improvement on their land. So understanding this diversity and bringing all these concerns together on a platform becomes extremely important to build a kind of consensus. Women have different kind of concerns, and they need consensus on different issues because they need worksite facilities and many other things, whereas socially excluded groups have different kind of concern. So it is extremely important to be sensitive to the needs of different people when we are building consensus. The coordination, as you rightly mentioned, is also very important. When we were scaling up, it was extremely important to keep the district administration on board, informed, and therefore we could get the letters issued from the district collector, who is the head of the district, the unit in India, which constitutes about 500 villages in this administrative unit. So asking him or her to write a letter, and then following with these lower level officials that you have this responsibility to do defining task, help in coordination. So one has to really plan a lot. One has to really identify what would be the possible task and actions required. So that helps in that coordination. The other kind of coordination was that when we were doing it in 1,000 villages, compilation of data was essential. So providing them right kind of format so that they put their data on that format, we collect it and compile it pretty fast and share the report to the seniors. So it requires a lot of planning at that level.
Thank you, Yogesh. We have a few more questions. We're going to go with a question from Varja Lipovsek and then a question from Ravi Dugal. Varja is asking to both presenters, do you see the strategy in responding to a wild card as different from one in responding to a blind spot? In a sense, responding to a blind spot is akin to course correction, great example of staying in program, not only signing up. But responding to a wild card can imply a whole new direction. Any thoughts? Welcome.
Albert, please, you take it up.
I don't know. I mean, it's a pity. Varya had to go, so it's a pity we don't have the chance to talk to her about this. I actually think that any new information that you get on what's happening to your program, like an example of people getting into the employment guarantee scheme, but then getting pushed out in ways that were perhaps not expected. I think any information of that nature, whether it's what we've called here a blind spot or a wild card, would potentially imply or bring one to a change in your strategy. So I didn't quite agree with the distinction that you made. But as I say, I would have liked to have heard more about what she meant. I don't know if someone else has an opinion to share with us, just to take that discussion a little deeper.
Well, we have Ravi raising his hand. Maybe he can add to this. Go ahead, Ravi. We can listen to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rocio. My question to Yogesh is that I just wanted, I'm not sure if he's mentioned this, but I thought it's important that the initiative that they took to create a record by making people to make online applications so that the system takes cognizance that a job application has been made. And I think that was an important strategic shift to put pressure on the system to function more efficiently in terms of providing the jobs, of creating the job opportunities within that area. So I think that's an important issue which I didn't hear, but I came a little late, so I don't know if it was already mentioned.
Thanks, Ravi. Ravi has been a co-traveler in this experience and advocacy initiative, and thanks for reminding. Actually, we realized that we need to use technology options as much as possible, and therefore there was an option on the website of the Government of India that anybody who wants to demand work can go and register there. Because registering demand of work at the local level is extremely difficult, almost impossible, because if you register your demand at the local level or at the national level, then you are entitled for unemployment allowance if you don't get work, and nobody wants to do that. And therefore technology helped the poor workers with the help of our facilitators and volunteers to use the web, put their name with their job cards that I want work. And that really created a lot of pressure on the government system. They never thought that the poor people can use the facility of the web. So it is extremely important, as Albert also mentioned, to keep our eyes and ears open and find out where the opportunities are rather than making it very tight-jacketed and in a logical framework what we will do. So opportunities can be in more blind places. We'll have to look at that. Thanks, Ravi.
Albert and Yogesh, there's several questions from the floor. If you don't mind, I'll read a few of them. I'll group them, and then you can address them. Is that okay?
Great.
Okay. This is a question from Cameroon. The indifference of local administrators is a challenge everywhere. How precisely can we adjust a strategy to address this usual indifference? This is from Jaf Bamenjo from Cameroon. Another question comes from Nadim Shahid. Government makes any announcement for nutrition or MNCH projects, but it gets changed, or I think, yeah, changed. How to deal new government to keep the promise of previous governments? Another question from Mufida Wizlati. What kind of strategy can we have in a context of political conflict situation, and what about social accountability? And then we have a question from Jessica Musila. How do you get government buy-in when you have been pointing out gaps in their implementation of rights-based work? If you want to, I'll leave it there, and then we can do a final round of questions.
I think on the question of indifference of the government officials, I fully agree. That is a typical characteristic of the government officials across, at least I can vouch for the developing countries. And I think the best way to deal with that is to figure out where we can draw strength from. For example, in this case, we could draw strength because this is an act and they have to abide by that. And therefore, that was one strength that we could draw. The second was to find small successes, because we'll have to look at win-win situation where they feel their performance is also linked with it and what they can do together. We may have to compromise with our larger goals and objectives at times, but that motivates. I think the image of the civil society organizations as problem creators has to be changed. They have to accept that they also find solutions and they are together. That becomes extremely important. I think there are, on the second question, government has been announcing number of programs in India and I think in many other places without bothering whether they can really fulfill the promises or not. And that is why social accountability instruments like social audit becomes extremely important. When the citizens will start demanding them, what you promised you have to fulfill, then they will not make false and extraordinary promises what they cannot deliver. Therefore, the role of the civil society is to actually build citizenry, I would say, actions and their awareness that they demand their own rights. So that is extremely important. In conflict situations, as far as I understand, because we work in one of the states which is also conflict, which has a conflict area, and my sense is that the local initiatives of social accountabilities are far more acceptable in these situations than the government monitoring, because the state apparatus is completely rejected and the community pressures and community accountability has little space, but one has to go very cautiously in these areas because it's a difficult, I would say, block. Government buying in is a major challenge in rights-based program, and therefore it is important to work with the politicians and elected representatives. Wherever we feel these rights are important, they have to be converted into some form of act or policies. Once we have the policy, then it becomes far more easier for us to put pressure for the mobilization of resources or the implementation of that act that has taken place. So right from the development of the manifestos to fulfilling their promises in form of constitutional provision is also a long battle we'll have to go if we really want common buying in that. Albert, if you'd like to add.
Yes, I think again, just to be a bit provocative and say maybe you know, there were a few questions around how to work with government when local administrators are indifferent or in a conflict situation. So I wonder whether I might ask the question about whether there aren't some strategic assumptions in those statements. So don't we sometimes assume indifference or aggression in a situation where we might test it? So let me tell you what I mean. Let me give you an example. In a couple of cases of organizations we've worked with, they have found that when they start their advocacy work with trying to build relationships rather than formulate demands, so where they will offer training to local governments, or where they will offer to share information. So there are a couple of situations where local governments are as challenged to get information as everybody else. So if the civil society organization has access to information that it obtained maybe from national government, such information, the sharing of such information or the provision of training such as Samartan did, might be the opportunity to build the sorts of relationships with maybe individuals in government that might allow one to get some traction and find some ways to at least start communicating with government. None of that is to deny that it is much harder to do this kind of work in a situation of maybe a conflict, or where government might be a little more closed than elsewhere. But there are also shifts and changes that we can make in the kinds of strategies that we pursue that might give us a little opening. Rasia, I saw there was one more question around strategy adjustment and reporting requirements to donors. That Jenny Ross asked.
Yes.
If you don't mind, if I can just, if I can acknowledge that that question, Jenny. I've been in a number of conversations with civil society organizations recently that have raised the same issue. Obviously, I don't have any easy solutions there, but it is a challenge where the commitments that we've had to make in proposals, in agreements with the people that fund our work, is maybe a little bit more rigid than our work requires. There are a number of donors, and I prefer we don't go into individuals here, but there are a number of donors that are beginning to understand that might not be a situation that facilitates learning and strategy adjustment. So obviously adjustment of strategy shows learning, right? It shows that we might be more likely to have an impact, which is obviously something that's good for everybody. One of the things that some of us have discussed, amongst civil society, is maybe a situation where annually there might be an opportunity to revise indicators and to revise program activities in a way that is evidence-based and motivated by solid argument, right? So that it's not a fairly arbitrary adjustment, that it's rather based on a motivated set of concerns, such as the things that Martin have just that Yogesh has just described. So yeah, that's a key area of future work.
Thank you, Albert. I'm going to read two more questions from the floor, and then I'm going to give the word to Maria, Nadim, and Jamila, who have been raising their hands and patiently waiting. So this question is from Vincent Nyanyika. How do you get the government incorporate your ideas when you have been exposing their gaps? Take an example of some undemocratic countries where critics to the government is a crime. And a question from Donnie Setyawan. I'm sorry for if I'm butchering your last names. I'm trying my best. His question is, how do you deal with the audit board on the implementation of social audit? And then, if you don't mind, I'll just go back to giving the word to Maria, Nadim, and Jamila. And I think with this round of questions, we'll go back to the presenters. Go ahead, Maria. We hear you.
My question is around youth. So I have two questions actually. The first one is, what made you tick when you readjusted your strategy in including young people as key actor in enabling the social audit process? And the other question is, being myself a big advocate of youth, young people in governance, I found it a bit sad in your case study that by the end of it, you seem to be saying that despite the fact that young people have been really active and key for the process, there doesn't seem to be any further possibility of them being involved in governance process. So I was also wondering why you were coming to such a conclusion.
Thank you, Maria. Nadim, we can hear you. Go ahead with your question. Nadim? Nadim, you had your hand raised? Okay. Then go ahead, Jamila. We can hear you.
Hi. So I realize we have very limited time, so I'll throw out one question, well, two quick questions, and then also make a comment in response to the question that Albert just raised about donors. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about your process of reflection, how often you met, what kinds of information you found to be important as you were adjusting your strategy, how contentious it was as you debated what new tactics or courses of action you should take, and so it would just be good to have a little bit more nuance there about how that process was for you. And also I wanted to ask a very similar question about donors, because I know that sometimes we can stifle strategic adjustment and strategy adjustment, and I wonder if you had a problem communicating this to your donors, and what advice you have to others about navigating this. I also wanted to point out that just recently I've seen a number of grant applications on our end where people have tried to be explicit about their assumptions, the kind of blind spots and potential wild cards, and have identified sometimes a number of potential courses of action that they might take to correct. And for me, this immediately has indicated to me as a donor that they want to be flexible about how they approach their strategy, and has given me a bit of room to kind of advocate for more space for them as they go ahead with implementing their strategy.
Thank you, Jamila. We'll take one more question, and then we'll go back to the presenters. Edward, Abu, go ahead. Edward, you were raising your hand. You have a question? Okay, go ahead, Albert and Yogesh. We hear you.
Yogesh, I think all of these were for you, so I'm gonna give you the floor.
Yeah. Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the first question, when we are identifying gaps, how can we build relationship with the government? That's extremely important, what you mentioned. Basically, the best strategy we found is to identify few individuals in the government. Government is otherwise nothing but a few individuals, and we'll have to find who are supportive of this cause, who have a history of doing certain positive things, who have guts to take accountability issues upfront, and meeting them, building a relationship with them becomes extremely important, and Albert has already spoken about that, instead of initially providing all the data. And, so that strategy works well, looking for the right kind of individuals who will be appreciative to the work of the civil society and the kind of work what is doing. In undemocratic countries, I have lesser experience to share, but I'm sure I think individuals will matter there, and we'll have to readjust the level of accountability questions that we can go in. But my feeling is that even if it is an undemocratic country, we should not lose an opportunity that the citizens should start asking questions howsoever small these questions may be. But let us build that culture that they start asking even smaller questions and not that big questions at that time. The audit board question is very important. Actually, we can do good social audits at the local level, and Albert has also mentioned about the capacities, but we have to also strengthen the audit boards, because there are many cases or the many actions required in social audits have to be taken at higher levels. And we have seen that the state level or the higher level audit boards are very redundant, and they are the larger cause of disappointment. If we have a good team of auditors, if we have a good team of those who can do redressal of problems of people faster, there would be greater demand for social accountability in many areas. So I think that's an important trigger we have to think in mind. I still believe, and I think I'll have to recheck the case study, and we fully endorse the idea that ultimately the change makers are going to be the youth, and we have experienced it, seen it in different situations, that they can withstand all kind of pressures with their emotional strength and their commitment for change. Therefore, let's continue to invest in the youth for demanding accountability. It really worked, and now government has also decided that the social auditors will be appointed in each village, will be responsible for the social audit, will also be youth, because they could see the value of youth taking that responsibility. So it's a long-term agenda, and let's not give it up. I fully feel that way. Now, in terms of reflections, we were sure that we need to have one structured reflection every month at different sites where we were doing social audits. There were monthly meetings, and monthly meetings were primarily for smaller adjustment in strategies. For example, one of the district level officials was not giving importance to the work we were doing, and we realized it is important to bring a senior level official from the state to meet him, who was a retired person but quite influential. So those kind of minor adjustments would take place in these monthly meetings. But quarterly meetings were far more important, where we could take certain strategic decisions. This whole decision to scale up had taken place in our 6-monthly review meeting, where we thought that we are getting stuck in this experiment in 3 panchayats, and we are unable to really negotiate with the government officials because we are too much ingrained into 2-3 panchayats politics. So we have to move out of it, rise above that. So that becomes extremely important. And I would put on record that it is important that donors in advocacy programs, in advocacy support, have to provide that flexibility. So I endorse that idea that civil society in advocacy program cannot have a typically projectized approach in a log frame. You have to trust them. We have to fix the strategic goals. We continue to review what their small achievements are. Are they on the right track? Only then I think we will be able to achieve significant changes. If we will try to tighten up too much into a log frame, I think you will only get an annual report which will tell about the numbers and not about any qualitative change. So that's extremely important, that we have to provide that flexibility. And I'm sure we need to look at new systems of monitoring and evaluation. Albert has mentioned that we need to think about new monitoring indicators. We also need to think about a new framework of monitoring and evaluation that we are looking at advocacy projects. That's the work all donor friends and civil society have to work together to find out new ways of reporting. Thanks, Rashia. Over to you. Albert, if you'd like to add something.
I couldn't add to that, Yogesh. Great answers.
Okay, we have maybe time for one final question. I think Bibu Sahu had a question very closely related to what Yogesh was describing, and so I don't know if you want to restate your question or if that was answered. He was asking how to ensure that the real social audit will happen with the participation of beneficiaries. How can we strategize ourselves as CSOs to make social audits work for the people? I think Yogesh touched on that. I don't know if there's other final comments or questions for either of the presenters. Otherwise, I'm going to thank you everybody for participating and joining us today. I remind you that the session has been recorded and will be available on the IVP website. The materials for the session will also be available to you after the session. And there is a very brief survey that we would very much appreciate if you can fill out at the end of this webinar so that we can improve this service. Thank you very much again, Albert and Yogesh, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Rasia, and thanks everyone who joined. For
Thanks, Rasia. Thanks, Yogesh.
And interesting questions you asked. Look forward to be in touch.
Thanks. Bye now.
Bye-bye.